it just shows the extent to which the political game has already permeated the judicial system, at least at the state level. And honestly, nowadays in 2022, going on 2023, the political forces have also permeated the federal level to an extent.
Welcome back to Lodge. We are continuing our ongoing series, our Innocence Project series, and review of Blind Injustice. Today we'll be discussing chapter 4. It's called Blind Ambition.
Blind ambition.
And what is blind ambition, Jabron?
Well, blind ambition is the concept behind, at least in the innocence movement, right? In the innocence work, or the context of wrongful convictions. Blind ambition is the concept that a lot of actions by prosecutors, judges, shareholders in the judicial and executive system tend to act not guided by a sense of justice, but guided by a sense of ambition. And that just means self-interest. So in chapter 4 of Blind Injustice, Professor Godsey talks about different examples that he's seen or he's seen through his career about judges, prosecutors, members of law enforcement, police officers, sheriffs, and how he has seen them act in their own self-interest, even against the most convincing evidence out there. So he discusses the concept in general, but also within the context of wrongful convictions, which is what the book is about and which is what the work of the Ohio Innocence Project is all about. To kick off the conversation, he just kind of says in general terms, he was a federal prosecutor. And as some of you may already know, federal judges are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and they have essentially a lifetime appointment. Yeah. So they imagine having job security forever.
Yeah.
The reason for that is, as you know, and some of you may know, is that once you have that lifetime appointment, you are not swayed by political motivations or pressure. Yeah. So nobody else outside can threaten you that you're going to lose your job or something, bad is going to happen in your career, because you already have that lifetime appointment. Like theory, nobody can take that from you.
At least, right?
Right. I mean, and like other offices in the federal government, one is not absolute, meaning you do bring something to the chair, right? And Godsey even acknowledges it, is you bring a little bit of your moral compass, and that in itself will also guide your decisions. But for the most part, if you are well versed in the law, you're gonna apply the law. That's the one thing. The other caveat is you could also be removed if somebody wants it, hard enough, and that's also an impeachment process, the way it's happened in the past with Donald Trump a couple times.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton, Nixon, so.
Yeah. All the very honorable, very high integrity
people.
Presidents, for sure.
Mm-hmm. So he opens up the chapter about, he was a federal prosecutor, but then when Godsey got to experience the state judicial system and state judges, for the most part, like the majority, I think it's like 30 some states, state judges are elected.
Yeah.
And with elections, you got to pander to someone. Mm-hmm. So then he talks about how that was a culture shock for him.
Yeah. I think the idea, because there's a lot of discussion now, especially with the Supreme Court, and I think there's good arguments on both sides. It's to that point,
there are fine people on both sides.
Good people on both sides. But there's the whole, obviously, that if you're appointed for life, that you in theory won't have political pressure. You can apply the law. But if you're elected, that you have this pressure. But then there's also the flip side of that: is it a bad thing if you do have political pressure? The theory is political pressure being you need to get reelected, and you are doing what the people want. So, in some aspects, you would think, okay, well, if there's pressure from the public that this person might not get reelected if they're not doing what the people who put them in office want them to do, maybe that's a good thing.
But at the same time, I see your point.
No, it's both sides. I get it.
No, but I see that point. But the thing is, this is not the time and place to do what the people want.
Yeah.
Because the people that put you in office didn't go to law school. People that put you in office don't know the laws, don't know how to apply the laws. So just because the mob says you should put this person in jail, you should not put them in jail if they're not guilty of the crime, right?
Yeah, but I think the issue is the legislature makes the laws and then judges interpret the laws. So the legislation is hired or appointed or elected by people, and then the judges who were appointed or elected then interpret what those laws are. And in some aspects, they might get lost in I don't know. I feel like it's the people might not exactly what they intended might not actually come out in the end once we get to the legislation passing a law that the people voted for, and then the judges interpret the law that the legislators wrote based on their own kind of thoughts on what that law means. But no, I get it. Obviously, justice should not have any sort of political influence, and the law is the law. But I think we see it's not that easy when you have judges who disagree on the law.
It exists nowadays. And so Godsey gives many examples throughout the chapter, but one that I had forgotten, I mean, we read about this when we first were in OIP, but one that I'd forgotten about was the Chris Bennett's case.
Yeah.
And so the case itself, just a quick summary, this is a guy that was convicted for, was it like manslaughter?
Yeah.
Right?
Vehicular manslaughter.
Because he allegedly he was driving a van or a car. They had crashed a thing against a tree or something.
Yeah.
So when they got to the scene of the crime, or I guess the sinister, because the crime I guess was manslaughter. Chris Bennett was sitting on the driver's side. He was intoxicated, barely conscious, and the passenger was kind of strewn across the engine block, between here and the dashboard essentially, and the passenger side. So the assumption was not necessarily a crazy assumption that he was driving, that Chris was driving. And even in the beginning, I think Chris was like, I guess I do. I don't have a recollection, whatever. Interestingly enough, later on, Chris recalls bracing for impact while being on the passenger side. And that's kind of what brings the whole thing within the realm of OIP. Because when the OIP fellows interviewed witnesses, there was one witness. This was in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. There's one witness that was there when he heard the crash. He went outside and he got to the side of the sinister earlier than anyone else.
Yeah.
He saw Chris sitting on the passenger side. The other passenger was still kind of showing across the whole thing.
I believe the passenger was gone when the police arrived. I think it was just him in the car.
No, the passenger was still there.
Was he still there? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Passenger was still there, but because what happens is Chris, kind of in his semi-conscious state, still intoxicated, he kind of stumbles over the body of his friend into the passenger's seat, which is where then law enforcement the driver's seat, which is where law enforcement and everybody else finds him. But the witness says he was sitting on the passenger side, and Chris was saying, I remember bracing for impact, and I remember, my DNA should be on the cracked windshield because my head hit the windshield, cracked it.
Yeah.
So that was like a breakthrough, right? And
so obviously there's a head injury there, which is going to mess with your memory. And
exactly. And then if you're intoxicated, that's also going to mess up with your memory.
Oh, for sure.
So the interesting thing is then the OIP fellows go to they find the actual vehicle, which was about to be destroyed in a week or something. Yeah, in a junkyard. And they find it, and the windshield still had the crack with dry blood and a bunch of hair.
Yeah.
So you were able to then see that, that was a point of impact, and that was all Chris's DNA.
On the passenger side.
On the passenger side, right? Which is hard for you to get that if you're driving. It just doesn't make sense. So, anyways, the reason why we give you all this context in the case is because Godsey brings this to the judge and says, hey.
And prosecutor.
Yeah, and the prosecution says, hey, we have all this information, whatever, and we filed this huge brief with all the evidence and everything. And the judge, who apparently, according to Godsey, was super chummy with the prosecution, kept giving the prosecution delays, granting the motions for delay, and that kept Chris wrongfully in jail for an extra year or and a half. Yeah. The whole point of it being that the judge was not being impartial as they are supposed to be. They wanted to be with the prosecution because once you have a wrongful conviction case in front of you, if you happen to exonerate someone, that could be flipped as you being soft on crime.
For sure.
Letting someone who is guilty out of jail.
And not even the judge, not even just the judge, but also the prosecutor, right? And it was the same pressure. It was again, conviction rates, and you got to be tough on crime. And so it's this idea that we got, regardless of what evidence is presented to us, how is the public going to take it? How is it going to look? And is it going to hurt me in the future?
Yeah.
And that was very much this, because it was clear. Not only did you have the blood on the passenger side, the crack in the windshield on the passenger side, but you had a witness who said, He was in the passenger seat.
Yeah.
It's like, what more do you fucking need?
He had all the DNA on the passenger side, none of it on the driver's side.
Common sense would be like, oh, this is going to be done. You're going to present this to the judge and prosecutor.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, oh, we made a mistake, and they're going to let him out. But that's not the
Blind
case.
ambition does
That's
not
right.
work that way, bro.
That's right. No, no, no. Not today.
So Godsey also has another example
Yeah.
in Dean's case. You know, we talked about it with Godsey during our interview with him. It was the first client that he had
Which,
in 2003.
by the way, real quick, he was just awarded $45 million.
That's right. Yeah.
The biggest, I believe the biggest like award ever in an innocence case.
The bigliest.
The biggest award ever in an innocence case for wrongful conviction. And not only is it huge because obviously that'll take care of him, his family, everybody for the foreseeable future, but it shows it sends a message to the state that this is not okay. We all know money is where it's at as far as making a change. So maybe it'll make them think twice next time they challenge an innocence case or make them actually look into it. You know, so
it's unfortunate because obviously you take a bunch of years off
Yeah.
of this guy's life, but at the same time, it's like if what hurts is if the money, the pocket is where it hurts. That's where you gotta put the penalty, right?
and that's insane.
And that's how you gotta learn the lesson.
This was a jury, and that's why it's such a big payout. You know, they do off emotion like this is messed up. It's not just oh well, the laws of Ohio say that. Too
You
bad.
get $56,000 per year. Whatever.
You know?
What?
So that was great. But anyway, as a side note.
Yeah, well, in this case, you know, obviously in the very beginning when we didn't know this was going to be the outcome, which is a great outcome for Dean, Professor Godsey was working with Gene Petro, who was the Attorney General of Ohio and then retired and went into private practice. So they both were working on this case to try and get Dean, you know, exonerated. Well, the judge, this is one of the examples of the political ambition, right, and the political interests that come into play. The judge wanted to run for mayor of Dayton, and that's the judge that was listening to the case.
Yeah.
So according to Godsey, the whole time, right before the judge left to run his campaign, he was just stalling, doing everything possible to keep Dean in jail, to not hear his case, not let him, you know, go out, not acknowledge even that the evidence was there that Dean was not the person that committed the crime. Well, in this particular case, in Dean's case, one big part of the case was his alibi, that he was camping with a bunch of friends, right? Nowhere near the scene of the crime.
There was like 10 people there too.
Yeah, there were a ton of people.
Like outrageous.
And they all testified and said, no, he was with us. Like there was no way he could have been with us.
Guy had a journal entries.
Then drive hours, commit the crime, then come back.
Yeah,
that was not it.
One of the dudes literally had a journal, and he had mentioned.
He said, no, Dean was there. He mentioned Dean in all his entries and everything. So keep a journal.
That's right, but it won't matter apparently.
Yeah,
but
at least not for some years, but then maybe you can get some $1 million
yeah, maybe.
afterwards. But take it from these guys. We've talked to a lot of exonerees, and the money they pay you is not worth missing all the time.
Not even
with
a
your
year.
family. Yeah,
$45 million for a year, unless it's towards the end of your life, maybe.
Right.
But those early years,
but missing out on your life, that's not worth it. But we digress. So in that case, then the point was like, oh shoot, there might be some receipts that we can show from the campground. And originally, the theory was that law enforcement had gone to the campground, gotten the receipts before anybody could go back and pick
they
them
were
up.
serving justice.
Exactly. Yes. We need to secure these receipts and not tell anybody about it. Right.
And just get rid of them.
That's just fucked up.
Oh yeah.
Because then you're not investigating a crime. You're now trying to destroy evidence.
Yeah, you're trying to frame somebody or at least convict somebody and hide evidence that would exonerate them.
And last time we checked, law enforcement did not have that in the job description.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. Not now, but maybe in the future.
Anyways.
Trump 2024.
So there was one police officer that said, hey,
after the trial,
I know.
Right? That was after the trial.
Yeah.
It came forward.
So after the trial, this police officer came to Godsey or to YP and said, hey, I know someone told me that they actually did go to the campgrounds before the defense or anybody else could show up. They took the receipts and they with the intent of hiding them. Mm-hmm. Well, Godsey and YP were trying to get this police officer to sign an affidavit.
Yeah, because that's huge.
Yeah,
right?
that's a
for an
huge
innocence
break.
case. It's like, oh wow, this is great.
And you don't get those breaks in innocence cases, often. So the whole point was, wow, let's would you sign an affidavit? But the thing is, going back to blind ambition, which is again the topic. the officer was like, no, if I sign an affidavit, then I'm gonna be going against my brothers in blue, which is a thing, obviously. And there's so much political pressure. I can lose my job. I can lose my friendships. Like, my best friends are cops. My wife is best friends with the cops' wives.
Yeah.
So
I think there's also a safety concern, right? Because like these are the people who are in charge of investigating crimes and have control over pressing charges. They all have guns. They all have I mean, I'm not saying
not
they would
into
do
the
anything.
sinister side of things.
Yeah, but
theoretically, you know how to
cover up a crime. Yeah,
right?
You would think.
And say, it was a junkie.
He had a car crash.
Who shot
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, it turns out
he was
the brakes
robbed.
were- yeah.
Who knows? But
So not to go that dark, but there could also be a concern. Is like I don't want to send this affidavit, but keep digging. You guys are on the right track. Well, unbeknownst to the police officer, Godsey wore a wire for I think they interviewed him 3 times. For the last 2 times,
broke the federal law, by the way. Or did he?
The Godsey wore a wire the last 2 times that he interviewed the officer, and got on tape, quite literally tape, that the police officer was hesitating to sign an affidavit for the reasons that we just mentioned. Anyways, Godsey then gets the student that was a witness to the police officer's conversation to sign an affidavit of his own and present it to the judge and say, hey, I was present, the police officer said XYZ. Well, obviously the prosecution doesn't like that. They go to the police officer's like, well, now I'm backed against the corner.
Godsey had signed his own too.
Yeah. So then they go to the police officer, and the police officer says, that's not true. They wanted me to sign an affidavit that had wrong information or whatever. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
The recorded...
They fabricated information.
Yeah, exactly. Basically. The recorded tape of the officer proves that what was in the affidavit from Godsey and the student was the right version of the events. Well, the judge, again, trying to run for mayor, he was like, nope, nothing's happening here, whatever.
Yeah. He sends all this stuff in, just meh.
He goes away.
Doesn't hear anything.
The funny thing, and this is mentioned in Godsey's book, is the judge later, he sets up a call with plot twist.
Whoa.
With Godsey and Jim Petro.
Yeah.
And with the prosecution. And Godsey even says in the book, is like, we don't know why this guy wanted to have a conference call if he already adjudicated and said, nah, go pound sand. And we were already pounding sand at the appellate level. Well, it turns out during the call, the judge says, I have it under good authority.
That the cop lied
shit, bro. You were the one that was adjudicating the case. Yeah. He's like, that attorney, Mark Godsey, violated a federal law by recording a police officer. And then Jim Petro goes like, bro, that's not a law, that's not a thing. And then the judge's like, is that true, prosecutor?
Yeah.
But he's like, yeah, no, bro, that's not a thing.
Yeah. And then he's like, I'll have to look into it some more.
Okay, bye. It hangs up the phone.
Which, here's the thing. How embarrassing is that? First of all, how do you not look that up? You got the AG, the ex-AG, right? The Attorney General for fucking Ohio.
And you're a fucking judge.
Yes.
You have clerks.
Exactly.
Get your underpaid clerk to look this shit up.
What did you just pull that out of your ass? I still don't get, how that happened. I mean, I've seen judges do dumb shit, so I believe it. But I'm just like, what? How embarrassing is that? And you got the AG, the ex-AG, and the current prosecutor on the case, both saying, nah, you're dumb.
No, that's not it. That's not it, Your Honor. Trying to be respectful, but this guy is dumb.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
So Godsey's in prison now. So, innocence case. He's innocent 100%. Any donations help. Trying to get him out.
Needless to say, the judge never came back.
Yeah, he went into hiding
to try and report Godsey for.
He also lost his election.
Federal law, and he lost the election. Yeah, so all this was for naught.
And he was reprimanded for abuse of discretion.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, the thing is, later on, and this is one point that Godsey makes in the book, is as you get away from local judges, that's when you get a fair shot.
Yeah.
Because then they're not as concerned with local elections and whatnot.
I agree with that 100%.
No, it makes total sense. But anyways, that was one interesting behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Because Dean's case is huge in its own merit. But then what was happening behind the scenes in the context of blind ambition, in the context of the political pressure that judges and prosecutors feel, I think that was one of the better stories.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's just crazy. And that, yeah, like you said, that was just one part of a million other issues that were present with Dean's case. And it's just, to anybody else on the outside, you'd be like, this is crazy. How's this guy still locked up? But here we are because of this shit.
I mean, if you guys haven't seen this, and this is something that both Jeff and I saw or watched on our own, before we even read the book, was John Oliver's. I don't remember. I'll put the link in the description, but I don't remember what the actual title is. But it's one of those Last Week Tonight segments from John Oliver. You can find it on YouTube, and he talks about precisely, the pressure that judges encounter when they're trying to do two things at once, which is, on the one side, you're trying to just adjudicate, right? Say what the law is and promote justice. And on the other hand, you're trying to get elected because that's your job. So John Oliver breaks it down in his usual hilarious fashion.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, and Godsey, talks about it all the time. But it just shows the extent to which the political game has already permeated the judicial system, at least at the state level. Yeah. And honestly, nowadays, in 2022, going on 2023, the political forces have also permeated the federal level to an extent. You see all the time in the news headlines of, a Trump-appointed judge did not side with Trump, and that is news. Well, guess what? That shouldn't be news because that's their job. The job is to just apply the law the way it's supposed to be applied, period. Yeah. But then you get the opposite when you talk about the Supreme Court and how it's now starting to get permeated with a lot of political biases, or at least accusations of political biases.
And now it's so rare, when they roll against Trump, it's like, whoa, no, my God, breaking news. They disagreed with them.
Breaking
it's
news, they're being fair. It's
it's like, oh, that should be normal. Their decision should not, because it doesn't align with the ex-president, should not fucking matter. But yeah, that's exactly how it is. And I think part of it is with the lower level federal judges, there's still that pressure because a lot of those judges want to move up.
Yeah.
And so they still have that, I got to toe the line, to try to do a good job to get recommended for these higher up positions. And so I don't think it goes away, but it certainly is less present than it is in the local level.
Yeah. And the thing is, when you have that political pressure, you have two choices. You either do what's right, which sometimes may go against your self-interest, or you succumb to political pressure.
Yeah.
And Godsey is the first to admit, not everyone is messed up. Not everyone is just looking out for their own. But inevitably, for you to do the right thing, you have to act against your own self-interest.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter what political party you're with. I mean, you think about it, if you get elected by, say, because now we're seeing a movement towards, for the first time in forever, public defenders are getting elected into judge positions where previously it was always prosecutors, right?
Right. Yeah.
But now it's the same pressure. It's like if you get in that position and you get a case and person's guilty, and you piss off the people who helped get you elected, be it public defenders, and they're like, oh, they're convicting these people. Well, they're doing their job. Just because the outcome's not what you wanted, but that also hurts them too, because if the people who put them in office were pro-defense and then you're putting people in jail, this is going to help you get reelected.
Yeah.
And you're also not friends of the prosecutors either. So it's like, regardless of what side you're on, there's still that fucking pressure. And to be fair and impartial, you're going to piss people off on both sides in theory. So to do the job realistically, how you should be doing it, being elected is not...
It's never going to be a good time. Yeah. It's never going to be easy either.
Yeah.
But one thing that Godsey points out is that there's two schools of thought. Or not two schools of thought, but there's two buckets of judges that, and their reactions when they hear that elected judges are exposed to political pressure. There's on the one hand, and they both get irritated or annoyed or offended.
Yeah, for different reasons.
For different reasons. Yeah. You have the ones that truly are trying to be impartial, and they know the system is politically charged. They still try to do what's right.
Yeah.
And then you have the ones that do succumb to self-interest and their butt hurt because you call them out on it. They
don't like that because it makes them feel some type of way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because you have and on I thought it was interesting. I kind of read between the lines on the book. God talks about two times when this happened. He was giving presentations. He was talking about this topic. And then at the end of the presentations, of both presentations, different states, different people, different audiences, he was approached by an angry judge. And the first judge, he says, I got the impression, after talking to her, that she was one of those that was genuinely trying to do the right thing and go against any political biases or pressures that she might have experienced. But then the other one is just like, you didn't get any friends with me or the other judges.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah,
okay.
It's like, what?
Yeah, so you're not denying that it happens. You just don't like it that I called it out.
I don't know. I've seen, from when I was doing defense work, Judge I won't mention, Judge Russell, Judge Russell was very much the prosecutor, she was a previous prosecutor. She is previous prosecutor. She's still on the bench. She is terrible, and to the point where you can't try certain cases to her. Any domestic violence case, you're going to lose 100% if you try it to her. It's got to be a jury trial.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that I did not say anything about you. I respect you.
I hopefully not, 'cause she's trash. But so she, you had to do a jury trial. Well, during COVID, they shut jury trials down. So your client was stuck in prison.
Could there be
jail.
like Zoom jury trials?
That's a whole nother topic. The confrontation clause issues and everything else. But so you literally had either guy sat in jail, or female, whatever, mainly men, but sat in jail, or they pled to something. And if it's a case you knew you could beat, but it was her as the judge, your client was either stuck pleading to something they didn't do, or sitting in jail indefinitely until COVID restrictions lifted. And so it's a really shitty position to be in. But this is the same judge that's pushing junk science that we now know based on research is trash. She came to our law school and was promoting mandatory arrest policies for domestic violence. Since then, he still has a mandatory arrest policy, largely based on her and other idiots like her promoting it. The research shows, even by UC Criminal Justice Research Department, the PhD program, and the master's program that I was part of, it doesn't work. The calls go down, but that's because people stop reporting it. The amount of domestic violence does not go down. People just stop calling because they know what the person's going to get arrested. And that person is often providing for the child and them as well. They're relying on them for income. They're relying on them from the house. And so they stop reporting the calls. The abuse still happens, and often they end up fucking dead instead of what could have been, prevented if the cops came and made them move for the day or whatever.
The incidence doesn't decrease, it's just the reporting.
The reporting goes down. And so it keeps going on. It's even worse. But, it makes people feel good.
Like almost embolden the person who's doing the abuse.
And she came to our law school and I questioned her on that, and she said, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm like, well, tell that to the UC professors who do this for a living, because apparently, you're smarter than they are, whatever. But anyway, this happens. She's not the only one. It's a lot of judges, and it's so bad that you literally can't try certain cases to them. And how is that impartiality, right?
Yeah.
So, it exists 100%, and she's elected, and if they are elected, there's all that other pressure because they know everybody's eyes are on them, and, it's going to get blown up. And every judge has that fear, especially with bond hearings or even trials. It's like, what if I let this guy out and he did do what he's accused of, and then he kills the person? And that's happened with the judge I'm not going to mention because I actually do respect that judge. And he's a very, very good judge. But that happened. That same thing happened. He let the person out on bail. It was a bond reduction motion. It wasn't my client, but could have very well been my client. And they got out. They killed their girlfriend. And now he's facing murder charges. And the judge calls the defense attorney who was on the case the next day and said, he was like, what the fuck? Like, like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
Like, and after that for, I'd say about a year, that impacted his decisions when, granting bond.
Naturally.
For the the detriment of the people who were trying to seek bond.
You kind of carry that with you, whether you want it or not.
Yeah. And so it wasn't just the optics, right? It was that played into it, the election stuff, but I think it was more just the, oh shit, like what this person did? So it was like an overcorrection. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot at play, but there's definitely that political pressure on the local level, and we see it every day, and it sucks because you literally gets that bad where I can't try this case to this judge, and that's literally their job. But you're like, I'm stuck with them. I got rolled to them. I can ask them to recuse themselves, but I don't have a good reason other than, hey, judge, you convict everybody that goes in front of you. And normally you're like, okay, I'll just try it to the jury. And that's a solution. That's a good alternative. But when COVID's happening and jury trials aren't going,
that's not an option. Yeah.
You either plead to something you didn't do, or you sit in jail indefinitely, not knowing when and if the restrictions are going to get lifted.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We had a lot of people just plea out. And it sucks because there's a lot of cases. Had it been a trial, we could have won. But
the pervasiveness of this political pressure expands beyond judges, right?
Yeah.
We talked about prosecutors a little bit, but it also goes into like law enforcement officers, because there is Godsey talks about the prosecution experience that he had, where they had the September indictment crunch.
I think that was it.
And but also on the police officer level, you have these officers who, even informally, even though it's not part of the official policy,
Somebody's dumb enough to write it, put it in writing.
Right, nobody put it in writing. You have arrest quotas, and that affects your vacation, your bonus, your leave, and how is that promoting justice? Right,
Yeah.
the correct and proper enforcement of the laws. If what you're doing is, I gotta stop someone.
Yeah.
I gotta arrest someone. I gotta just.
They might not have did it
unreasonably search
but,
them. They might have done something.
Yeah.
So in the off chance that they did, let me stop him and search him.
Or it's something you would have otherwise just gave him a warning and let him go, but now you're like, oh, well, now I got to charge you because, sorry, we got to meet a quota.
Right, exactly.
You know?
And he got to something like, at one point you would have like officers telling the person being arrested, no, it's your head or mine.
Yeah. But how messed up is that?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, even just having that, you could just be like, hey, judge, this happened, right? But then if the judge is selected, then you're fucked.
Oh, yeah.
Because it doesn't matter.
And I will say this. Maybe I shouldn't, but I am, because I had a problem with it too. The same thing exists on the defense side. There was this pressure to move up, that you needed jury trial wins. And so people would take stuff to jury that maybe shouldn't have been a jury trial, or maybe it was like, honestly, it was in the best interest to plea. But you're like, oh, well, to move up, I got to get a jury trial. Or not even a win, but you got to have jury trials. Yeah. So,
but then you're like, my client got, my client lost today.
Yeah.
Better luck next time.
Yeah. So in theory, there's this pressure to try cases that maybe shouldn't be tried.
Yeah.
Maybe you're either client's best interest, the bench trial is better, or it's just better to plea because the facts are against you. But you're like, oh man, I got to move up, and they care about jury trials. I don't really care about wins are obviously preferred, but it's that jury trial experience. Well, you might not have facts that align to where you get, enough jury trials in that time period. But you're like, oh man, I need to move up. This is what they're looking at. This is all they care about.
Yeah.
So even to an extent on the defense side, that was present. And I thought, to me, I'm like, I get it to an extent. I get the jury trial experience, but that shouldn't be the only factor. But there was a pressure. Yeah. You're like, I'm going to set stuff for jury. And then even because the good cases you got set for jury, like, man, this is going to be a great jury trial. Usually they get dismissed. Yeah. Because the prosecutor's like, I'm going to lose this anyway.
Exactly. They already know.
Yeah. So you got to try the cases that you're like, this probably shouldn't be tried, but they don't care about it.
Another notch, on my bedpost about jury trials.
Is the head defense attorney going to admit to that? Hell no, because they care, in theory, they care the most. And I believe they do care the most about that. But it's like, look at your metrics and look at what you're looking at. Because I don't think the prosecutors, when they're like conviction rates, I don't think they're inherently doing it as an evil thing. They're just like, oh, you're serving justice. You're doing good at your job. You're getting these criminals locked up. I think they mean well. The issue is that pressure naturally results in innocent people going to jail. Yeah. Because that your job is to seek justice, not get convictions. But I think they forget that. They lose that along the way.
For them, it's almost like a numbers game. The more convictions I get, the more justice I'm serving.
Exactly.
Innocent people be damned.
The flip side of that is on the defense, your job should be to get people the best possible outcome, defend them the best way you can. That doesn't always mean trying stuff to a jury.
Wolves, yeah.
So, I don't know.
In all fairness, though, if you experience this, defense, especially public defenders, are overworked and underpaid.
For sure.
At least because they're not paid pennies, but they're underpaid based on the amount of work they do.
Yes. If you were a private attorney taking on the caseload you take as a public defender, you would make $200,000 plus easy.
Yeah.
But you're not.
Because you get 100 plus cases at any given point in time. Yeah. Like to the point that you talked to me about this, as you were working on these, you get like 5 minutes with your client to try and. So how can you, and you do try and keep on trying, but it's hard for you to say, I gave my client the best representation possible they could have gotten when you have 10 minutes with your client's tops.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part about the job. That sits with you. Because you could have done a better job. There's more stuff you could have looked into.
If you only had time, exactly.
Yeah, but if you invest more time in that person's case, then you're taking away from another person's case. And is that fair to them? No, because you're already fucking restricted on time. So, and that's just a reality of it's not the office. It's the system. The system's fucked. But nobody cares enough to do anything about it. So here we are.
Yeah. Why don't we close in the chapter with the last piece that is discussed, which is this same bias, blind ambition, in the jury in juries, right? And how jurors may also be affected. As you know, jurors are also an important part of the judicial system. You have a right, generally speaking, to a jury of your peers, and that is presumably to guarantee that you get a fair shake in your trial. But there's a problem. Just going back to your point about the system, there's a problem in just how the system is worked up. I don't know that there really is an easy solution, because then you would just swing the pendulum the other way. But for a couple of things that Godsey mentions is like, one, juries are easily impressed, you know, and by that I mean the individual jurors, right? I'm talking about jury as a
the whole
whole.
CSI effect.
Yeah, exactly. You have the CSI effect, where you have police officers, obviously they're law enforcement, so they have an air of authority inherently. You have prosecutors who are very good at their job, most of them. And then they bring experts. They have a lot more money than defense attorneys do.
Oh, yeah.
So unless you're doing private defense.
A lot more.
Yeah, so they have experts, and then and that is what brings the CSI effect. Like, oh yeah, they're putting bad guys in jail. So you get that first impression that is obviously
they wouldn't have been
biased towards
charged if there
prosecution.
wasn't something there.
Exactly.
You know?
Well, that also goes to the own bias within the juror.
So
but just coming in from the outside, you're thinking, well, these guys really know what they're doing.
Well, yeah,
Wow.
but that comes with it from the authority, right?
Oh yeah,
You're like,
exactly.
Oh, they know what they're doing.
Oh, they know what they're doing.
They wouldn't charge them.
That means that person must have done something.
They wouldn't have charged them unless there was something there.
So you have that to begin with. The prosecution goes first. And even if we take aside what we just talked about, and the jury has a fresh mind, a clean slate, blank canvas,
Yeah.
the prosecution gets to paint that first picture.
Which the whole thing is like, oh, it's the state's case. They have the burden, so therefore they get to go first.
Which makes sense to an extent, but in practice, you're painting on a relatively speaking, a blank canvas. So when you get then the defense is trying its hardest, presumably, to paint over that original picture that was painted by the prosecution. And sometimes, one, you shouldn't, because the prosecution is the one that has to prove that you committed a crime.
Yeah.
But two, even your best efforts won't be enough to cover that previous painting, which already then has, it's not enough to string back the jury your way and then find your client innocent or not guilty.
Yeah, I will say from a technical standpoint, though, I think it's a lot easier as a defense attorney to let the prosecutor go first anyway. I mean, they're going to, but like, especially if it's a burden case and you don't have an alternative. Oh, my client was fishing in Alabama on this date. You're just like, it wasn't him. It's easier to poke holes in their argument than it is to, well, this is our story, and you don't know what the hell they're going to say. I would much rather them go first, tell their bullshit, and then poke holes in it and show all the issues with it, rather than have that issue, especially if it is a burden case. There's not enough evidence there.
But at that point, you're also relying on, and this is something that Godsey also mentions, you're relying on the jurors really sticking to the rules.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of things that you as a juror are not supposed to consider. In reality, they probably consider them.
Yeah, but I think we well, not just jurors, but we all do that. I think the defense attorneys do.
but yeah,
I'll get into that in a minute. But
to your point, it goes back to what I was saying, which is sometimes you don't really need, as a defense, to paint the picture at all. You're like, that picture is wrong, and let me tell you why. Boom, boom, boom. We just poking a couple holes. But unless the juror that is listening to this argument is like, well, that's right, they didn't do it.
Yeah.
Unless that poking the hole is enough for them to string back that way, where you don't have to paint a picture. I mean, you are exposed to an extent. No. You're saying you have a risk.
You're right.
It's inherent.
The worst defense you want to have, outside of no defense, is a burden defense, where you're like, they didn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt what they're saying. You always want to have an alternative theory, obviously in an ideal situation, because people like a story, storytelling, whatever. So if your whole argument is, hey, my guy didn't do it. Look, the story they said there's problems here and there. That's not a good position. Now, it might win if you really hit home to the jury. Look, this is their burden. This is how high it is. They got nowhere close to proving
bad their evidence is.
But that's going to depend on the jury that sat and how well they really respect the law and are able to understand that. And that's ultimately, you want to have an alternative theory. I'm not saying it's like the best possible outcome, but that's kind of like the, oh shit, this is all we got. Let's poke holes and stuff. Because sometimes you don't. Maybe God just says like, hey, I wasn't me. I was sitting at home, but there's nobody to corroborate that. Well, that's not much of a story to tell. But you can poke holes in all the stuff they're saying that proves this wasn't that guy that was there.
Yeah.
So that might be all you have. But yeah. That's ideally you're gonna have an alternative story to tell them because that's everybody wants a story.
Yeah. On one hand, you have the job that the prosecution can do, and how jurors may be impressed by that. On the other hand, is once you're doing jury deliberations, jurors will act on their own self-interest as well, right? And this is not necessarily ambition, right? I want to be selected as a juror again, so I'm gonna
Woo, get that $12 parking, whatever, like $12 a day, like.
So, but and the one example that Professor Godsey gives is in Dean's case. I think it was Dean. I don't know if it was Dean or it was Clarence Elkins, but in one of the cases, the jury was deadlocked, 8-4. When the judge said, "Hey, if you guys don't come up with a unanimous verdict, we're gonna have to be here tomorrow." All of a sudden, magically, it was now 12-0.
Yeah.
So the implication is that the jurors just wanted to go home and not have to deal with this again or any longer. So now let's just go ahead and go with the pressure. In this case, it might be more like peer pressure than political pressure, but there is ambition within it in the very strict sense of I just want what's good for me, and that is to get out of here because I'm only getting the $12 per day pay.
And on the judge's point too, and then everybody else that's there is also like, "Oh, we're gonna get the hell out of here." Like, why are you, whatever.
But even if you have someone who's like, "Listen, I don't believe this person is guilty, so I'm sticking to my vote." You have the people within the room that nobody else is able to listen in, saying, "Hey, come on, you want to be here tomorrow? Whatever, we don't want to be here." And that is peer pressure.
It is.
And as an adult, when you're in a room with 12 other people or 11 other people, and they're just looking at you, most likely than not, you will give in.
And, you got other factors. You got your family at home. You got to work because you got to actually make money to provide for your family. At the end of the day, it sucks. But, I think people are like, well, I got to be there for my family. Ultimately, they come first. All these other people saying he's guilty or her, whatever. And then it's easy to just kind of give in at that point.
But it's like sharing the blame at that point, right?
It's like, they're doing it too.
It's like,
exactly.
Everybody's doing it too. If it's wrong, we're all wrong.
Exactly.
Instead of saying we shouldn't get it wrong.
Some people at that point kind of second guess, too. They're like, well, everybody else is saying they're guilty, and I'm not. What if they are guilty, and I'm the one who sways?
Yeah. What if they're smarter than me? What if they?
Yeah. Even though that's our system, right? But it's so there's a lot. There's a lot of pressure all around. And, you certainly can see how it gets to that. But, it's, like you said, it's not like they're trying to get re-sad as a juror, but they're trying to go home, and they're trying to not be judged by all these other people. They're trying not to also, I think, have that pressure of, what if I got it wrong? Everybody else is saying it's this. What if I'm wrong, and often in the serious cases, it's not somebody who's speeding that you have a jury sat for, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to be the person who was like, well, I went against them, and they actually did that, and whatever. That's a heavy burden.
It is. So definitely not an enviable position. But anyways, that is in a gist, Blind Ambition, chapter 4 of the book Blind Injustice by Professor Godsey. As always, on these discussions for the book, the link is going to be in the description. Jeff, any parting words?
No, I think it's just the moral of the story is, if at all possible, follow your own moral compass, and you can always find another job.
Well, and for some of us, there's value in doing the right thing at all costs. Yeah. Right? And if you think about it, it's hard to generalize, but if you think about a lawyer, when you go to law school, you don't learn the law, you learn skills. Mm-hmm. Right, the ability to interpret the law, the ability to find answers to questions that are analyze, think critically, and all that. Relatively speaking, an attorney should always be able to do what's right, because if you lose your job as a prosecutor, your job as a judge, your skills don't go anywhere. You should still be able to take those skills and apply them somewhere else within your same right.
And the reality is, a lot of other agencies are going to respect that. You get fired from the prosecutor's office from standing up for a defendant, you're going to have 8,000 other places that are going to hire you because of that.
So, but we realize that that's not the case in every single situation, in every single scenario. But it's one of those things, again, like we talked about during this series of the Blind Injustice book, where just knowing about it may help you a little bit. And as you encounter the situations, maybe you think twice before just going with with the mob mentality or going with the pressure that you're feeling. It's like, hey, you know what? This sounds like it could be a bias that I could overcome. So just that in itself, maybe there's some value in there.
The reality is, at the end of the day, you got to live with yourself, and that's all that matters. The job, political or peer pressure, political pressure, none of that matters. At the end of the day, you go home to yourself and your family, and if you're not okay with that, then nothing else matters.
None of it is going to be. None of
I
it is
think
going to be good.
your own moral compass is more important than any pressure from the outside. But
agreed. Well, on that very philosophical note,
that's right.
We thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next time. This was Lawish.